Alright, welcome back everybody, and we're going to do another tomato review today on this tomato right here. And this is called the yellow balcony tomato. It's a micro dwarf. And what is a micro dwarf? Well, a micro dwarf is basically a plant that doesn't get too much bigger than 6 inches tall, and it makes tomatoes. I'll show you one right here. So that's a micro dwarf. You can see this plant as opposed to my hand. My hand is actually bigger than the plant itself. There's actually a tomato on it, and these plants will put out quite a few tomatoes. You can see there's some new shoots coming up over here, or these might be new plants. Some of the seeds, I let one or two of them over ripen, and then the seeds popped and they went in there, so now more plants are coming up. But these plants, what you see right here, as you know, in relation to my hand, that's about the size of the plant. That's about how big they get. They don't get much bigger than 6, 7 inches maybe. And that's about it. And it puts out its tomatoes, and generally after it puts out its tomatoes, it generally starts to die back. Now these plants are considered determinate plants. So what that means is once it fruits, it puts all its fruit out, then the plant dies. Now, I'm the kind of person where I see opportunity that you can actually call this a semi-determinate, meaning that once it puts out its fruits, if you pick them where they're just a little bit ripe, and you get them off the plant and then prune the plant, that plant will keep living, and it'll go on for years. And so you can get quite a few harvests off of one plant. So as long as you keep pruning a plant, it'll keep producing tomatoes. So that's my experience with it, and we'll see how many years we can keep this plant going before it does eventually completely die. But in my opinion, it shouldn't completely die as long as if I keep pruning it back. That base should live for many years. So we'll see. We'll see how many years. This plant's already about a year or so old now. It's about a year and a half old now. So we'll see how many more years we can get out of this plant. So anyway, this is the tomato for this particular variety. It's called a micro dwarf. This particular variety actually produces very small cherries. It's not a currant tomato. Currant tomatoes are generally pimps, and pimps mean Solanum pimpinellifolium. This is a Solanum lycopersicum. So it's not a pimp, but the tomatoes are almost the size of a pimp. So that's why I'm saying that. It is a lycopersicum. It's just it's coming off a very, very small plant. So it's going to look like a very small tomato. So let me show you one, give you an idea of the size. And back you back out so we can get, so it doesn't blur out on you. Very sensitive, the camera. Alright, so that's about the size, or like a large pimp tomato. Alright, large currant, or a very small cherry, however you want to look at it. This is about the size of a pimp, right here. That's the size of a pimp. That's exactly what a pimp size should be. But it's not a pimp. Alright, let me show you the inside. Now, I've already dropped the other side, and it went splat, because these are well overripe. Now, I do want to point out that these tomatoes will ripen much faster than regular tomatoes. So as soon as you see green tomatoes on this plant, in about half the time a regular tomato takes to ripen, these will ripen very quickly. So you need to keep an eye on them almost on a daily basis once you see it put out green tomatoes, because at any point they can start to ripen, and that's when you want to get those tomatoes off the plant. So I usually pick them usually around in this stage, even a little bit before. So you can see right here, this one's like a little bit on the yellow side. Here's one that's fully ripe. They get a little on the orange side. I try to get them off where they're just starting to turn yellow. Get them off the plant so the plant can start putting out more flowers. As long as if you keep doing that, the plant will put out a ton of flowers, and it'll just keep producing tomatoes until the plant just decides to start dying. That section of the plant will start to die. So you want to prune that off, make sure the tomatoes are off it, and then a new section of the plant will start coming up. And the cycle goes on and on. So I'm not going to weigh these, because they're probably going to weigh less than 0.1 of an ounce. I mean, they're really, really tiny tomatoes, so there's no point in actually putting this under a scale and weighing it. But I did want to show you the plant, which I think I just did. You know, showing it to you. Now this is all the old foliage. You see it died back. You can see I cut it here. I'm going to cut it again because I just picked off all the tomatoes. A couple tomatoes on here. I left them on for the camera. And I'm going to cut most of this back probably after the camera's done. You can see, like, I picked most of these tomatoes, unless that's a runt. No, these are all been picked. So this is all going to get pruned off of here, and then this got to get cut back. And if you look down here, you could see down, where are you? Right there. You can see down here it's already putting out new shoots on the lower stem. So we want to take off this whole upper canopy, and it's going to make a new, it's just going to put a whole new canopy up there. So just keep that in mind. See what the brick says. Now I've eaten a bunch of these already. I actually been eating these. These were the first tomatoes that I've been eating for the year, and I'm going to tell you, I like them. I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to spoil it for you, but I like them. Okay, 6 on the bricks. Right on the money, actually. 6 on the bricks. We'll cut open another one that's a little bit more firm, because like I said, these have been sitting on here for a while. I just haven't had a chance to get to them. I've just been busy. This knife is starting to go dull from cutting all these tomatoes. The acid has actually took the edge off of my knife. I gotta resharpen it. Alright, so let's give that a go. Okay, so let's go over the sweetness first. The sweetness was actually quite sweet. It was unusually high in sugar. It actually tasted like it had some kind of sugar in it. So that was unusually high. So sweetness wise, I'm definitely going to be putting that about 36 on the sweetness. Very, very high sweetness, and it literally tasted like sugar. So it was a very, very sweet type of tomato. Now the tangy part was, yeah, it's a little bit lower than average. I'm going to say 27 on the tangy, so it was a little below on the tangy side. So I'm not terribly impressed with the tang, but it wasn't bad. Now these tomatoes we just looked at here, they've actually been sitting up on here for about 2 weeks. I just haven't had time to get to them to review them, and they just sit there, and some of them actually started to ferment inside, basically meaning that they're souring and they're starting to go bad. So that's my fault, because with these tomatoes, once they start ripening, they ripen very quickly. Once you pick them, and you're gonna, once you pick those, you got to use them within a day or two. You can't, after that, they'll just turn to mush. They ripen very quickly. These tomatoes are not like regular tomatoes. They just ripen at an accelerated rate. So when you pick them, use them. If not, their flavors are really going to start to go out. Now the tomato flavor was actually quite nice. The tomato flavor tasted, I don't know, it tasted like tomato. The sweetness was strong, so it kind of throwing me off. Almost tasted a little bit like ketchup, a little bit, in an odd way. Almost had that sweetness like a ketchup, the sugary taste that's in ketchup. It was kind of that kind of effect a little bit, but it had a tomato flavor. It didn't taste like ketchup type tomato. This actually tasted like tomato. So now, where would I rate the flavor as far as 1 to 10, and 10 being the lowest, and no, 1 to 10, 10 being the highest in the case of flavoring tomatoes. 10 would be like your highest number in this particular case, and where would I rate that flavor? And when I say rate the flavor, I'm talking about the strength of the flavor. How strong was that flavor in the tomato? How dominant was it? I would say it was about middle of the road. I'm going to say about 5, maybe a little higher than that, 5.5, something like that. It wasn't extraordinarily high, and it wasn't it was right about the middle of the road as far as the strength of the flavor. We're not talking about whether the flavor was good or bad. We're talking about the strength of it. How strong was that flavor? So I'm going to go about 5, maybe 5.5 on that flavor. It was about average. Moisture obviously was off the chart. It was about an 8.5 on the moisture. It was because they were so ripe. They're all liquid already on the inside of the tomato. So obviously with that, it's going to be way off the chart. But normally with these tomatoes, the moisture in them is roughly around a 6 to maybe 6.5. This particular case that we're testing these now is much higher, because they're way overripe, guys. They're ready for sauce, basically. They're overdone. And it wouldn't be fair for me to tell you that it's 8.5 and it's all wet. I've eaten these tomatoes when they're freshly, picked off the plant and they're well ripe. That moisture part of it is usually, I would put that number like around 6.5. It's nice and moist, very permeable, and it really delivers the flavors and everything right to the back of your tongue. So we'll put that a little bit above average on the moisture side. Tardy, there was really no tardiness. I'm going to go 0 with the tardy. It wasn't, mouth puckering or lemony type of effect from it, nothing like that. No undertones. It was pretty much clear of undertones. Texture, and now again with this tomatoes, because they're so ripe, the texture is virtually non-existent because they're almost liquid inside the tomato. But again, having eaten these already throughout the year, the texture is right about mediocre. It's right about the middle of the road, and we'll go on a 5 on the texture. And the skins, though, the bad thing is when these tomatoes really ripen, the skins get really tough, and so the inside will melt, and you'll be left with a skin bag in your mouth. So just keep that in mind. When the tomatoes are still young and kind of firm, you kind of have to still chew them yet. The skins break up good, but as soon as this tomato starts to get really watery and mushy and overripe, you forget it. You got to spit the skins out. They're way too thick for this tomato when it comes to that. So that's kind of a down thing on that. As far as the texture of the tomato, not based off of the tomato we just ate because those are overripe, but the texture in general from tomatoes, I'm going to say about middle of the road. It's about a 5. Yeah, you could probably go a little higher than that, maybe 5 1/4. It's about average on the texture, but that texture immediately changes over and turns to a liquidy within a few days. So you got to keep that in mind. These tomatoes ripen extraordinarily fast, much faster than all your other tomatoes. It's going to really ripen these things. As far as production, I mean, it's a micro dwarf, guys. You can't fill up 5-gallon buckets full of tomatoes with one little plant, I mean. But for the size of the plant that this is, and the amount of tomatoes I keep getting off it throughout the entire year. I mean, I'm getting tomatoes off of this plant during winter. I'm getting tomatoes off it in spring. I'm getting tomatoes off it in summer and fall. I get tomatoes all year. So if you look at the long run of things, the tomato production on this plant is extraordinary. And that's because you're able to eat tomatoes all year, and the thing just keeps producing more and more tomatoes. So in that, if you look at the acute sense of it, like how many tomatoes are put out all at once for a determinate, it'd be very low because it's a small plant and only put out about maybe 6 to 8 tomatoes, and then the plant starts to die. But if you keep trimming it back and you do like I'm telling you and showed you, and this plant produces tomatoes throughout the year, you're going to get 10 times what I just told you. So you're talking about maybe 80 tomatoes off of that little plant. You know what I'm saying? So now you change the whole thing because of the long term. The short term, you're not going to get a lot. And if you chuck the plant out, that's all you got was your 8 tomatoes and that's it. Or a dozen. I mean, I've seen as many as a dozen tomatoes come off of this plant at one time. So I have seen as many as that. And then I picked them all off. And then it's just like every time you pick them, though, it's a little bit less the next time. So it's like every time you trim it and put it back, it only puts out maybe 4 or 5 the next round, then about 4 or 5 the next round. It starts reducing the amount of tomatoes it produces every time you trim it back. But it constantly produces. So in that sense, how would I rate production? I would rate the production about a 9 because of the fact that you can just constantly eat tomatoes all year. I don't have any other tomato variety that's actually capable of doing that. And I can grow this thing under a little light bulb in my bathroom if I wanted to. You know what I'm saying? A little night light this plant will grow. So you got to look at the cost and everything that it costs for to produce tomatoes. Yeah, one plant ain't going to give you a whole lot of tomatoes to eat salads every day. But if you grow 10 of these plants and you kind of start them off at different successions, you'll have tomatoes all week. I mean, it's a great little variety. So I mean, for me, this is more of an ornamental and a fun type of a tomato to grow rather than seriously growing it for tomatoes for edibility. Unless I grew about 20 plants, then that would start to meet my tomato demand. But because it doesn't, it's because I don't have the room really to grow that many plants just for this one variety or any micro dwarf tomato. It's unfeasible for me. It's actually more cost effective for me to just buy a couple of cartons of tomatoes in the store or visit the local farmers market up here where I get tomatoes. I get tomatoes relatively pretty cheap, and some good ones too. I mean, the tomatoes I get at the farmers market are 1,000 times better than what I get at Walmart. But it's a great tomato, guys. It's a heavy producer, and for a little tomato, it'll produce for you all year. Your support is definitely appreciated. That's it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.